Welcome to Math Plus, where math makes sense. Fractions on a line plot. So we're going to look at how to use fractions on a line plot, but to begin with, let's review what a line plot is. Here's an example of a line plot about cars that are being sold. You notice across the bottom, it's each day of the week, and the X's stand for the number of cars sold. So in other words, on Tuesday, there were 3 cars sold. On Thursday, there were 2 cars, and so forth. Here's another example of test scores, and the circles stand for students. So in other words, 2 students scored 45, and it looks like 5 students scored 50. So that's how you read a line plot. But let's look at a couple that involve fractions. Here we have a foot of snow. And the X's equals 1 day. So this means 1 day there was 1/8 of a foot of snow. 2 days there were 6/8 feet of snow, and so forth. So that's how you read it. But this is the type of question you might have. What is the difference in the amounts of snow between the greatest and the least? So to figure that out, first of all, we know that difference means to subtract. So if we're going to find the difference between something, we're going to subtract. So we want to find the greatest amount of snowfall. So you would use 7/8. You would not use 8/8 because there was no snowfall on that day. So you would use 7/8 as your greatest, and then you would subtract the smallest, which is 1/8. So the answer would be 6/8. Because 7/8 minus 1/8 is 6/8. And again, we can simplify by dividing by 2/2, and the answer would be 3/4. So when you're working with line plots, you may have to do any of the 4 operations: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So let's look at another example. Here's a line plot of hours spent reading. Each X represents 1 student. So in other words, there were 4 students who read for 3 hours. There were 3 students who read for 2 1/4 hours. So this line plot even includes mixed numbers. Here's our question. How many students read more than 2 1/2 hours? Notice it says more than. So we go over here and look. Here's 2 1/2 hours, but it wants more than 2 1/2 hours. So under here, there were 2 students who read 2 3/4, and there were 4 students who read 3 hours. So the answer to that is very easy. That would be 6, because it asks for the total number of students who read more than 2 1/2 hours. So sometimes when you're dealing with fractions on a line plot, the answer doesn't even involve working with the fractions. You're just determining the amount of occurrences on the line plot. Let's look at another example. In this same line plot, it says 1 student spends 1 1/4 hours reading, and you see that right here. And 2 students spend 2 3/4 hours reading, which is right here. What is the difference in time spent reading? Well, we know the difference means subtraction. And so the ones that read 2 3/4 hours read for 2 3/4, and the other child read 1 1/4. So we just have to subtract. Now, I like to put mixed numbers up and down when I subtract them. So 2 3/4 minus 1 1/4. I already have like denominators, so I can go ahead and subtract. 3/4 minus 1/4 is 2/4. And 2 minus 1 is 1. So my answer is 1 2/4, or I can simplify 2/4 by dividing by 2/2 and get 1/2. So this would simplify to 1 1/2. Let's look at one more example. Here it says 4 students each spent 1 3/4 hours reading. What is the total hours that the 4 students read? So if we look at 1 3/4, we can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 students. Each read 1 3/4. So what is the total hours? Well, we can either add or we can multiply. We can add 1 3/4 4 times, like this. And add them all up, or we can multiply 1 3/4 times 4. Now, if you remember how to multiply mixed numbers and fractions, you know we have to turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. So 1 3/4 is the same as 4 times 1 is 4 plus 3 is 7/4 times 4, and I'm going to put that over 1 so we can multiply the numerators and denominators. 7 times 4 is 28, and 4 times 1 is 4. 4 divides into 28 7 times. So the answer is 7 hours of reading. As you can see, when you're working with line plots, you may have to add, subtract, multiply, or divide fractions.